That's all right. Ready to record.
Okay, so did you get me blowing that raspberry?
Yeah, I did.
My name is Laura Garofalo, and I'm a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing. I teach here with the high school students in a hearing center, but part of my role is also I'm an itinerant hearing teacher, which means that I travel around to other schools and I work one-on-one with my students who have hearing loss in whatever classroom they're in or in the different schools. So there's two different settings in our school board. You can either be a student with hearing loss that is in a hearing center where they're partially integrated into the classroom, and then the other half of the time they're in a center with a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing, or they're in a fully mainstream classroom all the time, and then the teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing, like myself, would come and visit from time to time just to work on language and literacy development. So the way my schedule works this particular year, I go to 2 schools a day. And in total, I visit 8 schools, but not every week and not every day. So in the morning, right now, I go to my elementary schools and I work with my students one-on-one for the mornings. I have some junior kindergarten students, and I have some, I have a grade 6 student and a grade 7, grade 5. And then I also, during the mornings, I'll go and visit my high school kids that are not in a hearing center. So I would just make sure that their equipment is working, or if their teachers have questions, I answer those. And then in the afternoon, I drive over here and I support the students in our hearing center. I follow them to their classes and I note take for them so that they're able to use all their attention to listen to what's going on. They don't have to worry about putting their head down to take notes, and that helps them from missing, that keeps them from missing information. Because without them being able to look at the speaker, they might miss some of the message if they have to put their head down to record their notes. Another part of my job at this hearing center is that we do a lot of pre and post teaching of vocabulary and new topics that might not be familiar to our students, so that then when they hear these terms or these topics in the class, they understand right away what's being talked about. Just imagine if you didn't know the word paint and you had a whole lesson on painting. You really wouldn't know what was happening. So my job would be to take the student ahead of time and say, this is painting, this is what it looks like, the verb, the noun, everything to explain, so that when they're in a setting where the word paint comes up, it's not something that is unknown and takes the meaning away from what's being taught.
So what are some of the similarities and differences between your students?
My students, as I said, I have a range of students from junior kindergarten all the way to grade 12. Some of them have a bilateral hearing loss, some of them have a unilateral hearing loss, which means they're deaf or have a hearing loss in both ears versus just one. Some of them have hearing aids, some of them have cochlear implants, some of them have both. And you met Alessandra, she's an example of a student that has both. Some of them also have additional learning disabilities. So not only are they deaf, they might have a learning disability as well. So that is something that could change the way that they learn. Just poses more challenges for them in terms of learning and academics. But I guess going back to your question about the differences between typical students and students with hearing loss, it just might be, the biggest difference is there's certain things that we learn, hearing people learn through just overhearing or casual conversations, side conversations, eavesdropping on conversations when you're not supposed to be doing that. If you're a student who's deaf or hard of hearing, you really miss out on that, because that's something that happens organically. And if you don't have the hearing abilities to do that, you kind of miss out on those I guess, those opportunities to learn through just organic, I'm not sure what the word is, just through life that happens naturally. So what we try to do is kind of model those kinds of experiences as much as we can as teachers of the deaf and hard of hearing, just to kind of fill in those gaps. And again, I think another big difference is certain vocabulary terms that you learn through, like slang or certain inside jokes that are current. If my students don't have direct exposure to those things, they might miss them, and they might not. It's different for everyone, but that's the biggest difference that I notice.
So we were speaking a little bit about the controversy between what's going on in the deaf community between American Sign Language, ASL, and Cochlear. I know you were speaking before, and you come from the lens of I'm not an expert. So as a amateur, just as I am,
okay.
What is your take on what's going on within the community? How do you feel about it? And I kind of want you to keep in mind your students, like when people say that right versus wrong, how do you feel on the whole situation?
Yeah.
Not to get too political, but.
No. And as you said, I'm not an expert by any means. I'm not deaf. I have no hearing loss, and I don't have anyone in my family personally who is deaf or hard of hearing. But I do have an opinion about it, and I think that from what I understand of the controversy, it's just that on one hand we have the people who believe that cochlear implants are the way to go and they're the right thing to do, and then we have the other side where they think the cochlear implants would be the absolutely worst thing that you could do. And I think my opinion is just that it has to be a personal choice, and it's a choice that comes from parents, and it's a choice that they have to make pretty quickly. You have to decide shortly after you find out that your child has a hearing loss which way you'd like to go. And for my students, I think that the cochlears were great for them. I think it helped to give them the opportunity to access a lot more information than they would have if they didn't have any type of equipment. But on the other hand, it's a personal choice, and I know of families who both parents are ASL users and they don't use any spoken English at all. So I guess they might not think that hearing is something that's important for their child. But in terms of my role and what I see in my students, I think having the cochlear implant was a huge benefit to them, and just, kind of levels out the playing field in terms of what, if they're attending a mainstream school where there are a majority of hearing students, it just gives them access to all the same information that the other students are hearing.
What have your students taught you in terms of the importance of language and the importance of just sound? Yeah, exactly.
That's a big question. So what have my students taught me about the importance of sound in their lives? I have to think about that for a minute.
Yeah, just in terms of sound, communication, because I know that my personal message to everyone is communication is key. Whether it's ASL, whether it's cochlear, it's all about the communication, because through communicating, we have connection. So by me being able to speak to you, me being able to hold her hand, that's how we build a connection. So I know what I'm learning, and I'm curious to see what you've learned, just having so many years of experience, just dealing with individuals who have experienced hearing loss and have kind of, in a way, gained it back.
I guess the biggest thing that I've noticed working with kids, like I said, that whole scope of kindergarten all the way to grade 12, some of them were implanted soon after birth, and some of them waited quite a bit, just depending on their circumstances, if it was a medical reason that they lost their hearing, or I guess if they determined later that they were hard of hearing or deaf. So all of those things play a part, but I think the biggest thing that I noticed is their hearing loss is maybe profound or severe just basically that if they didn't have the equipment, they would be almost totally deaf. And some of them are such amazing students. And if you couldn't see their equipment, you wouldn't know that they had a hearing loss at all. And so I think that having the option for a cochlear implant for these students has basically leveled the playing field again. It's almost made it like the hearing loss isn't a disability at all for them. And I know that some people think that a hearing loss isn't a disability at all, but I mean in the sense of being an academic, being a student, the ability, giving them the ability to hear and to access sound through their cochlear implants. Some of them are, you know, scholarship students, they're university bound, they're A students, and they're able to achieve everything that any other student could achieve. So I think basically the cochlear or the hearing aid, the assistive technology that my students use, really, and being able to access sound in terms of social communication, in terms of academics, in terms of anything where sound is required, even listening to music, it's basically made it as though they don't have a hearing loss at all. And that, I guess, has gotten rid of all barriers for them to be able to be successful at school. Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
I hate it. I know. I'm like, oh, my
no,
hair.
You don't look nervous at all. Now you realize.
You don't. You didn't look nervous. Neither did you. I feel like I was like so stiff.
No, you're awesome.
Like,
Yeah.
I appreciate it because we kind of just like.
We just jumped on you.